shit.
Ad Infinitum is the only podcast solely focused on audio ads.
Advertising.
The creatives who make them, and/or the latest thinking that informs them, how the space is evolving, and, my favorite part, a roundup of recent audio ads and analysis by yours truly,
Ad campaign.
Stu Redwine, VP Creative at Oxford Road, and each episode's guest. This is Season 2, Episode 4 of Ad Infinitum, and this episode's title is Scary Ads. Discussing the creative approach to scripting fiction podcasts, the role of sponsors and ads in spoken word audio, and then ranking 4 ads from a recent award-winning podcast. And that is why our guest is 2 people, Ray Harkins, Senior of Ad Sales at Wondery.
What's up?
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stu.
And Nathalie Shisha, producer of the 2023 Ambie Award-winning podcast, I Hear Fear.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you guys. So I recently watched Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, and that ending really got me thinking about the power and pitfalls of audio sponsorship. The film closes with a 1920s-style radio play dramatizing the tragic Osage murders, complete with an upbeat announcer and a plug for Lucky Strike cigarettes. It's a jarring tonal shift that to me epitomizes how audio storytelling can go wrong when the pursuit of ad dollars takes precedence over emotional truth. But here's the thing, it doesn't have to be this way. I've long believed that audio, when crafted with intention and integrity, has an unparalleled ability to move hearts and minds. Sound is inherently intimate. It is, tapping directly into the same neural pathways as our emotions. The right message delivered with authenticity and enhanced with artful sound design can leave an indelible impression. Sadly, as the Killers of the Flower Moon radio play demonstrates, the potential is often squandered, generic copy, cliched effects, and a disregard for the cultural weight of the subject matter. These are the hallmarks of carelessly slapping a sponsor on a story without any deeper consideration for the power and responsibility that entails. Looking back, this kind of haphazard approach has deep roots. In the early days of radio, brand-sponsored serials and variety hours were the norm. You had the Palm Olive Hour, Kraft Music Hall, shows named after their sponsors with ads woven right into the entertainment. It was novel for the time, but the lack of thoughtful integration and reliance on forgettable, inauthentic announcer copy set a troubling precedent that persists in much of today's audio advertising. So what's the solution? I believe it starts with a fundamental shift in mindset. We need to stop treating audio sponsorship as an afterthought and start recognizing it as a craft, one that demands the same level of care, nuance, and artistry as the content it supports. When the sponsor respects the story and the story respects its subjects, that's when the true emotional power of audio can shine through. And take the ending of Killers of the Flower Moon, spoiler alert. After the glib radio play, the film cuts to Martin Scorsese himself, stepping up to the mic to voice the tragic postscript of Molly Burkhart's life. It's a haunting reminder of the heights that can be achieved when a master storyteller wields the power of audio with purpose. If more brands and creators brought that level of thoughtfulness and intentionality to their audio campaigns, focusing on authentic, emotionally attuned storytelling above all else, I believe we'd see a tremendous positive impact, not just on the bottom line, but on hearts and minds. Because that's the true potential of this medium, not just to sell, but to transform. Okay, so that's kind of some high-minded stuff, but I also believe it's true, you know? I mean, we've got to make ads that sell, but we do want to connect and have a larger impact. I think we all do. But like the rubber hits the road, right? So how does this break down when scripting fiction podcasts? I'd like to start with you, Nathalie. Does it kill creativity knowing that there's going to have to be ads in the story that you're telling?
Yes and no. I think that knowing that an ad break is going to be inserted at a point in the story means you have to think really, really strategically about how you're going to get the audience to stay through that ad break. And so you need to build like a master act out or a cliffhanger or a turn. Like it really encourages thinking about plot and encourages thinking about audience. So in a way, it's kind of a gift to storytelling that we have to think about, like, what's the thing that's going to keep listeners listening? But it can be hard for listeners, I think, and I think this is probably like what you're getting at, to shift from like the dream space of the story into like a commercial space where suddenly something is being sold to you, and then to switch back. And so I think that there's some friction probably for the listener, but for us as creators, it's kind of a net benefit to like be forced to think that strategically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because it gives you some sort of boundaries or lane lines to create within.
Yeah,
and
it
it
always helps. Yeah.
Completely. Just on the drive over here, actually, I was listening to Batman Underground, which the producers of that I'm going to mention later on. But there was a scene, and then it went to somebody was like listening to the radio in Gotham City, and it was switching through radio channels. You could tell it was Gotham City. And I was like, oh my God, are they going to go into an ad break? Like, that would be amazing. They did not.
That idea. Oh.
But yes, it's a cool idea. I think, Ray, for you, when it's like, okay, so director of ad sales, you've got all these shows matching the sponsors to the style of the story, or, you know, let's just throw another ad in there. Like, how do you deal with that dynamic?
To your point, it's always been a tough bridge, especially when you look at the podcast landscape. Hosts, like, you know, that is the premium that is placed on everybody developing this parasocial relationship with the person who is this host that they love over time, they trust. Obviously, they do an ad for a thing. You're like, my best friend is telling me to buy this pair of underwear. Of course, I'm going to do it. And then also on top of it, the fact that usually fiction podcasts, there's a limited run. It's 6, 8, 10 episodes at the most, maybe more. But I think it's one of those things, like those two ideas have always kind of been separate from what has existed in the podcast landscape. For me, I think it's the point of, I mean, I got into the podcast medium from radio, but then also like The Shadow, Arch Obler's Lights Out Everybody, like these really old radio shows, and they were integrating within the context of their ad breaks. I mean, there's only so many people that were advertising on those shows, so you would hear the Lucky Strikes and whatever. But I think within the context of the creative ways that people are selling their products and the wide swath of people selling products now, where it's like, I mean, obviously we work for Wondery, so me mentioning Audible feels like, you know, money going from one side to the other side. But I think the way that Audible approaches when they're doing advertisements, like they really want to make sure they're focused on places where it's like, what's good storytelling? Whether it's a hosted podcast where this person has a relationship, or whether this is just a very compelling story. And so I think that brands that look at the space and be like, hey, we want to be ultimately where people are like really, and I hate to use this stupid marketing term, leaned in, but it's like when you are immersed in that, and then you are being hit with an ad, yes, it is incongruent in certain aspects, but then it's also like, well, I'm here. The reason this show exists is literally because of these ads, and that's okay. And that's always been okay in the podcast space, as opposed to square peg round holing it, where it's like you're putting the Geico Gecko in a fiction podcast, like yelling at you. It's like, buy insurance. And you're like, Jesus, Lord Almighty, this was a quiet show. Like, I think to me, that's always the idea of, all right, marrying the content with the appropriate advertiser. And that goes up and down for host reads or non-host reads, whatever the case may be. You don't want to just be able to fit something in just because like, oh, we got to make $1 from it.
Yeah, and matching the tone. And I was thinking about, well, when it comes to this, I actually have an example of a shift out of an ad break into some ads that I wanted to talk about. But I've had the thought that like, I wonder sometimes subconsciously, especially as like we're on the other end of the streaming wars, like all on-demand content, that when you hear ads, you know you're not paying for that. And so is there actually like a positive subconscious payoff of like, yeah, that's right, I'll listen to this ad, I'm saving $7. It's like, I will gladly listen to this ad so I don't have to pay, you know?
Honestly, like, I mean, as funny as that sounds, we're obviously very close to the space,
right.
So it's difficult for us to kind of separate from that. But I often think about why it makes podcasting so interesting is the fact that not only are people used to hearing ads in the space, but the straight line that is drawn from being like, hey, if I'm listening to this ad, I am literally supporting the creator or company that brought this to me. No one thinks that when they're watching like the NFL or whatever. I mean, that's obviously, you're talking about 17,000 different steps before you're like, oh wow, this football player is probably seeing a little bit as much. Like they're not, obviously, but just that fact that that is hard boiled into the podcast space makes it that much cooler, where you're like, okay, cool. Like the reason that I get this for free is because of this. Like it's a trade-off. And on top of it, hopefully the ads aren't annoying and they're actually educating me.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes I'll listen, like I have Wondery Plus, which is our app where you can listen ad-free. And as people who work there, we obviously have unlimited access to it. But I will sometimes choose to listen to the versions with ads, just because one, I enjoy hearing ads. I enjoy hearing how people are trying to pitch products to me and like what story they're using to sell things. And I also just like hearing like what's happening in the world. Like I think of ads as almost like little trend bleeps or updates, you know?
Absolutely. If they're done appropriately and no one likes their content to be described as content in the form of advertising versus like quote unquote actual content. But you're right. Like it is one of those things where it gives you the signal of like, okay, what is the audience of this show? Like I see why this advertiser is appearing on this. I see the way that the host is approaching this read or whatever. And it's like, I've worked at companies where we've had a service that strips the ads and people can remove those. But then there are shows where the ad reads are so engaging and fun that people are like, oh, there's no way I'm ever going to subscribe for the premium thing. I want them to, do this 4-minute ad read or whatever because it's funny as hell.
Yeah, it's a little snapshot. I feel like you can go back to any decade in time and you look at the ads and it's like, if you want to understand where the zeitgeist, it's like, just look at the ads and you can kind of see what that culture was working through. So this example of a transition I've got is actually from I Hear Fear, coming out of the show into the break. So let's listen to this.
Rains when it's supposed to be sunny. Usually the film comes out and no one knows any different. But this movie didn't work out like that. It's never seen the light of day. And in the end, I barely made it out alive.
Had you had this prescription, it would have been guaranteed that you'd make it out alive. Thought I'd just start with that.
That was amazing. Obviously, it's not a visual medium, so listeners can't see, but like my shoulders were going up and stuff. Yeah. Wow.
And I think that like that goes to show where it's like, because the particular show that you were working on, we weren't leaning in from a sales perspective. We weren't leaning into host read ads. Like there's so many things that we obviously wouldn't do in regards to the show. I mean, there are times where I have sold fiction shows where the host is an important part of it. Like the narrator is an important part of that and their personality in and of itself. So like they would feel comfortable doing the ad reads. But I think that was obviously just a, dynamically inserted non-host read. Like we're interested in hitting this particular audience of this show, whether it's just like, hey, we want adults 25 to 44 that are looking for prescriptions or whatever.
Well, and I have a thought, though, that it's like that show is so intense. Like I listened to all of I Hear Fear, that there is a natural, like I feel like I've been trained with broadcast media that like the ad break sometimes is like a nice,
Yeah, an adrenaline relief.
And they didn't try too hard. Like the thing I wanted to talk about was, I've got another example that I want to play to kind of make this point, but a show like I Hear Fear, which very much is about like people harming each other, whatever, like that doesn't mean every ad needs to start with something like, there are lots of dangerous killers out there. Are you in the mood for some killer deals?
Right.
Like it's almost like if you go too on the nose. So that's where I'm trying to hold these two things in my mind. I'm not using that example to go bad and this is good. It's like, there's a case to be made for even, we're going to an ad break now. It's like my oldest daughter's in show choir. It's like you have intermission. You don't go out and the person that's selling you the candy bar is singing to you. It's like, would you like a candy bar? It's a complete break from the content. We were doing that. Now we're doing this, and that's okay. So it's not bad. So here's another example. And this would have been in either Clean Beauty or Under the Skin. So for anybody listening, absolutely recommend listening all the way through. But so Natalie, this would have been in either Clean Beauty or Under the Skin. I'm not 100% certain, but I think the point could be made for either one of them here. So here's another ad.
How would you like to look 5 years younger? In a clinical study, people that had volume added with Juvederm Voluma XC in the cheeks perceived themselves as looking 5 years younger at 6 months after treatment. Look younger, feel like you.
What do you think?
This is something I wonder about. Like when the content has a very ambiguous attitude towards something like beauty products, how dangerous is it for people in the beauty space to advertise on the show?
I think, most of the time it's just identifying an audience. I've worked with this client before through a particular agency, and they're looking to hit females between the ages of 30 and 45. So that's really the play there. So they're like, across your entire network, we want to identify these people and like not run in these specific shows, but just find these listeners, whatever content they're listening to. And so you absolutely will run into the case where it's like, this feels weird. And usually shows, there are call outs that you can do to be like, hey, I want to block these certain categories or whatever. And, a lot of the times it's the hosts that are pulling that trigger to be like, I don't want whatever alcohol brands or these things that, they don't feel personally attached to. Like, even if it's not voiced by them, they're like, I do not want this in my show.
Yeah. For context, that episode, if it is Clean Beauty, it's about a young woman who gets a really prestigious job at a fancy wellness a spa that has a dark secret at its core, as you'd probably expect.
Don't they all?
How do you think Erewhon got so popular?
I loved it. I loved the episode, by the way, as a father of 2 daughters.
Oh, gosh. But the thing is, it is the same audience. Like, that makes perfect sense. The people who would be interested in beauty standards, the harm they do to us, the reasons why we pursue them, the reasons why we do get value out of them, are probably the same people who do consider skin creams, Juvederm, Botox.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like, I think, especially from a marketer's or advertiser's perspective, they are looking to find the audience, whatever they're consuming, whatever they're listening to. I always joke around where it's just like, we as humans are like absolute freaks. We're so weird. Like, we can be listening to a horror podcast, and then the next minute we can be listening to a kid's podcast about brushing your teeth or whatever, because you're kids. And so because of that, it's like so difficult to be able to identify, where am I going to find this person? And then sometimes you are going to run into like, this doesn't seem contextually relevant, but it's just like, well, I mean, it's not, but it's audience relevant.
Yes. The reason I bring up these examples is that I think the bigger sin is when you try to do it and you don't do it well. I think that ads existing in the shows to reach a certain audience, like, I think that if it just cuts in, it actually isn't the worst thing, because like what I was saying before, we've all been trained for that. I think the bigger challenge is if you try to go there and make it cute or tie in or something. I don't know. With this one, I was thinking about it. I was like, if it was under the skin or clean beauty, you could do a small thing to kind of, tie it together. But do you need to do that? I'm not sure. I'm open on that.
Yeah. This is something that, again, because we sit so close to the environment, it's sometimes difficult to, see the forest from the trees. But like, I always feel pandered to when it's like, I think it's a Capital One ad. No shots against Capital One, but shots also.
Well, this show is about breaking down ads, so it's okay.
Right. I think literally there's a tagline in some of their creative that they do across non-host red. They're just trying to capture an audience. They're being like, hey, this is the easiest decision that you can make working with Capital One than listening to another episode of your favorite podcast. And I'm like, don't tell me how easy it is to listen to a podcast. I'm already listening to a podcast, you idiot. Stop. And so again, I'm too close to it. Anytime I get mad in an advertisement, I'm like, let's calm down, Ray. But it's just that idea of what you're talking about, where it's like, if you get too cute, too kitschy with it, that could be, turning people off in the wrong way, where they actively dislike the brand because you're trying to play too much to the crowd or the audience.
Yeah, they can smell the BS a little bit, right? It's like, wait, you're doing this to me to try to get a result. As a creative, like, how do you think of it? Would you want to see more ads tailored specifically to the show, or would you want to see them like, hey, let's just go to the break and let the break be what it is?
I would be very intrigued by ads that like tried to lean into the story, that tried to make themselves part of the story world in creative ways that didn't feel like pandering. My question for you guys, though, is like, do people have the budget for that? That requires that they have their own creatives. They have their own writers. There are people who are thinking about how they're selling their product as carefully as we're thinking about how to tell our story. And that has to be individualized for every show. Like, is that a realistic expectation for advertising?
I mean, for the most part, no. But there are ways, especially if you get enough of a heads up. I mean, obviously we see product placement all the time in television and movies and stuff like that, to where we either have become desensitized to it, or it's just obviously in like every Apple TV show, there's only Apple products. There's certain things where just like, oh, I didn't notice that. But then when you actually think about it, you're like, I get it. Say like a car brand were to be like, hey, we want BMW mentioned in like 2 episodes or whatever. You probably could figure a way out if you have enough lead time and you feel like it's enough to be able to do that. But to get the creative team on, the brand side to be able to think about that appropriately and not just be like, well, we need to be mentioned 17 times because that's what our research says in order for people to remember the, 350 or what. Like, sometimes then you could just edit that to death and then you hate your show because you have to mention BMW 17 times or whatever. And so it's tough.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a difficult proposition. When I think about it, it's like what we have found makes audio work really well, even perform and make work that we're all proud of, is inefficiencies, is taking the time to really craft it. Yeah. And that transcends fiction to even like working with hosts, where it's like getting on the phone, having conversations, crafting something. The end result of that is something that's more powerful, that's more thoughtful. Trying to do that in a land of spots and dots and efficiencies. And then when you've got AI that can customize the stuff, it's a difficult proposition, but I'd be all for it if somebody wanted to take that on. And it can happen. I think there's actually an example ad that we're going to grade here in just a minute that I think they do a pretty nice job. We'll see what you guys think.
Don't lead the witness.
Yeah, exactly. What am I doing?
He's like, I think it's really good. You guys should probably give it a 10 out of 10. So here we go.
Yeah. Please give it an honest 5-star review. That's what I ask everybody about this podcast. podcast.
That's so good.
Yeah. And I picked it up from another guy. It was this podcast called The Best Thing Ever. And they say, please leave an honest 5-star review. So I'm always doing that. So yeah, when something is crafted and thoughtful, I do believe you can feel it. Does that always translate to performance? No, because something that's not crafted or thoughtful necessarily, especially for us creatives, can perform really well, and what's rewarded is repeated. And that's kind of a tough dynamic. But I think there is a downside to a lot of stuff as well. And so if you guys just go with me here on this, that I think makes the case for the upside of audio. And I think we're going to see increased entrance in audio, and particularly in fiction audio, and for kids specifically. So the most nominated podcast for the Ambies this year was a fiction podcast that was called The Very Worst Thing That Could Possibly Happen, which, Natalie, anybody that's familiar with storytelling, I feel like that's sort of a shorthand from writers' rooms of like any scene you get into. They're like, okay, now for that character, what's the very worst thing that could possibly happen? We need to raise the stakes. So these guys just came out and named their show that, which I'm like, my hat is off to you. So it's by husband and wife duo Alex and Winnie Kemp, founders of Wolf at the Door, who also produce podcasts for larger studios like Batman Unburied, which I'd mentioned earlier. That's for Warner Brothers Discovery and Spotify. And earlier this year, I made a prediction on Oxford Road's Media Roundtable podcast that this space, fiction podcasts, audiobooks, let's call it audio fiction, is going to expand, right? So like, for instance, it was a fiction podcast that was the most nominated podcast for the Ambies. And for me, that's tied to what I believe is a greater collective unconscious reaction to screens. It's the whiplash of all the negative consequences of screens that are being felt and experienced and continually validated by research. It's like when a virus has run its course, right? The worst viruses, so to speak, like worst for their hosts, are the ones that kill their hosts and then they die out. They completely decimate the population and then the virus goes away, right? Like the crack epidemic would be like kind of another idea of that. Like, why are people not like still done? Because it killed all the most susceptible and then there's nobody left. Right. And that's what I think is going on with screen time. I think that that is what is happening. And I think that that means an opportunity for audio, that you're going to have a whole generation of the ones that are younger now that even they're going to go to raising their kids. Like I think of my folks' generation where everybody was smoking everywhere in the cars, they had to clean ashtrays. A whole lot of them actually don't smoke, right? The ones that were raised around it was so disgusting. And I've seen little kids' reaction sometimes to a phone, a parent on a phone that's like violent. It's like, put that down. Look at me. And I'm like, I have hope in humanity that they're going to go, yeah, I'm good. I don't want that. That stuff's toxic. That's nasty. But audio is something that you can partake in. There's intimacy tied to it. You can interact with it in the world. And so I think there's going to be an increasing surge. So Natalie, I think your job is incredibly secure.
I love the optimism here. I think that audio does feel like this intermediate step between reading and watching. And so it gives you the pleasure of being fully immersed in a story and hearing production. You know, you're still having somebody who's created this world for you, but it doesn't have, like, you're not quite as overstimulated as you would be watching something on a screen. It lets your brain go into a different mode. And I do think that we're in desperate need of breaks from screen time. I love this. Let's take advantage of this, like as a campaign. Audio as, an alternative to screens.
I think people are subconsciously doing that. I think that's part of the explanation of the growth in audio, is they go, put this away, but I can still listen to the stuff. Ray, do you have a point of view?
Yeah, well, I mean, audio persists regardless of how people are consuming it, whether it's radio. There's so many different iterations of it, or obviously music, like the proliferation of the fact that most people would never even think to be like, oh, dude, I'm never going to listen to like an audiobook. But the fact that it's like included in your Spotify premium or whatever, it's just like the ease of use for people to back into podcasts, audiobooks or whatever is so there of everybody of every stage in life, all ages. And I think regardless of whatever is happening from screens or the fact that, we're going to have chips implanted in our head, just the future iterations.
You didn't get yours implanted yet?
Yeah, not yet.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm on the waiting list. Yeah.
Okay.
Once I get my Cybertruck. No, I'm not getting a Cybertruck. But just that idea of being able where it's like audio is static as far as like, yes, of course we can have really interesting things with 3D audio and other ways that we can tell stories and be immersive, but the way that it's delivered is going to be relatively static. And I think that that's something that's going to be consistent. And especially to your points too, when you expose a good story to a younger person and they're just like, oh, this is great. Tell me more. I want to know more, whether it's like you're literally reading a book to them or whether you're exposing them to a very interesting kids podcast. And just the fact that it's like you can do that for people at any stage in their life is really, really compelling. And it will just persist. It'll just be like different formats, take different holds. And ultimately, it's going to lead us to a space where audio will always be there. It will just be a matter of how we put it in our ears.
Yes, and I think it's so powerful because it gets the imagination going. A friend of mine, a commercial director, Jordan Brady, recently said it shows us more than we can see. It engages the imagination. Screens don't. Screens slow it down. You become passive, right? Audio is active. Like you have to think of whatever it is that they're describing in the scene. And that's why we see more dollars going into the space. Such a fantastic place to tell a story, and top talent is going there, right? So the show that we're going to be talking about is Ad Lucem. Now, Ad Lucem won the same award, Nathalie, that you guys won in 2023 with I Hear Fear, which is the best script writing fiction. So Ad Lucem won that for 2024. That's the Ambi winner for the best script writing fiction. And it's produced by Q Code, Barry Lyndon Motion Pictures, and Salt, with executive producers Chris Pine, Olivia Wilde, Ian Gottler, Troyan Belisario, and Joshua Close. Some of those names, at least I think, are absolutely household names. I mean, you know, Chris Pine, Olivia Wilde, Troyan Belisario. People know who these people are, and here they are. Of all the things that they could be doing and all the things they could be investing in, they're investing in this space and telling a story this way, which is pretty cool. So Ad Lucem is set in the year 2032. It's about this company, Ad Lucem OI, that has created a augmented reality assistant where it's like it's beyond just voice. It's like it's VR, but there's actually people that are like connected to them. So it's like you're talking to an AI, but there's a human there. So it's augmented. And much like in the Clean Beauty episode of I Hear Fear, this well-intentioned, incredible company turns out there's some stuff going on. There's some dark dealings, and that's really what the show is about. And mankind's struggle with trying to create these incredible tools. And then how do we still do that in a way that is good for everybody and doesn't allow bad actors to just run roughshod and use it as a way to harm?
Yeah, exactly. That it's being presented as a tool for connection, that you can have like a projected 3D virtual assistant with you at all times to talk to experience things with, to share jokes with. But does that actually give you a sense of connection, or does that just like reinforce the lonely lifestyle that all these people in the show, what year was it set again?
2032.
2032. Not now. No, we're not lonely now, but
Just
2032.
so close.
Yeah.
So close. We're right there.
Yeah, excellent point. It is all about connection and like the definition of what is true connection, and then how do we use technology to enhance legitimate connection versus coming in between us as people. It's a very good show as well. So the 4 advertisers, I picked 4 different ads from the show: Sonos, Era, Twizzlers, the Dave app, and BetterHelp. And so this is where we get into the heart of ad infinitum. We're going to listen to each of these ads. I have our grade from Oxford Road, which is the system that we use to rate ads for persuasiveness, is called Audiolytics. So it's a score. It's helpful in this context just to kind of give us relativity to each other. But I'm really interested in what you guys think from your own professional opinions of like how you think these ads did. And in light of this conversation that we're having of matching the content versus, hey, it's okay, we're in an ad break now, so just go for it. So with no further ado, let's get started with the first ad from Sonos Era 300. And here we go.
Hey, Ad Lucem listeners. I'm Alexa Ramirez, one of the producers of Ad Lucem, and I'm thrilled to tell you about our sponsor, Sonos. Their new Sonos Era 300 allows us to experience spatial audio like you've never heard before. While listening to totally immersive podcasts like Ad Lucem, imagine having a sound system that helps build that environment around you. If you haven't dove into your Sonos journey yet, now is a great time to start. The Era 300 is an all-in-one speaker with both plug-in and smart capabilities that is designed specifically for immersive and spatial audio listening out loud, a full 360 experience. What I love most about it in my home is how sleek it looks. Its modern design definitely fits with what I already have in my own home, and I get compliments on it all the time. If you already have a few Sonos items and are ready to level up to the next best thing, you can add the Era 300 into the mix. When paired with the Sonos Arc, the Era 300 unlocks the ultimate and most immersive Sonos theater setup. Soon you'll be one step closer to the best listening experience out there. So go get your Sonos Era 300 now and learn more at sonos.com.
All right, the game is afoot. Nathalie, I'll start with you. What do you think of that ad?
I mean, bravo to the placement. Jesus, you can't do better than that, can you? Like, you know, the audience wants immersive fiction, and you have a product that's going to give them a better experience of immersive fiction. Like, hats off to whoever was able to, like, put that deal together. I did lose focus about 3/4 of the way through the ad. It did start to feel a little repetitive, and I do wish that if it's an ad for sound, I would have loved to hear more of a variety of sounds. So, like, give it a little bit more vibrancy, a little bit more, like, just encourage more engagement. I started tuning out.
I mean, it's an age-old question, 60s versus 30s. And then, of course, there's even shorter lengths. But, like, this is an example where you're saying is, like, did the 60 really get us a whole lot more? Plus, it's a produced ad, so maybe shorter would be better. I love your idea of product demonstration. Like, this is what it sounds like. It's built on the premise of, like, you're experiencing, you know, immersive audio in the actual show. But I think you bring up a great point. And it did have kind of that, like, meditation music in the background. And it was a very pleasant voice, which I think all of that works. I also would say, you know, her identifying Alexa Ramirez, that she's one of the producers of the show, brings some weight with it. So just adding on there to what your experience of it, Natalie. But Ray, what about you? What do you think of this ad?
Yeah, I mean, again, because I'm very close to it, I see exactly what they were doing. And I'm familiar with what Sonos has done in the podcast space. Like, they love these sort of shows, but they also love comedy. Those are their two verticals. They're like, can we do something that showcases the fact that our technology will help enhance your listening experience in a controlled environment? I love your idea of obviously showing an example, but people are listening to podcasts in non-immersive environment where it's like, you know, doing dishes on their AirPods or whatever. Of course, it would be great if they were listening to it on Sonos and being like, oh, wow, I can hear this panning from the left to the right. And like, oh man, this is crazy. Anyways, but then like including the producer, that's great because that's a sort of substitute host read. And obviously she's including impersonal experience. They clearly shipped out the Sonos bar to them. Like, yo, check this out. So that felt good and it didn't feel forced. But I do think that especially in the context of fiction shows, shorter is better, in my opinion. I think when you're doing 30s to 45s, that feels much more appropriate because you don't have to go on like what you're talking about, where it's just like, all right, we got to hit a 60. So of course we're going to, you know, include all of these other things, make sure to mention the brand's name at least 5 times, et cetera, et cetera. So overall, I liked it. And I like the inclusion of the personal experience because that's every ad I sell. I try to have that as a part of the ads that I do. So yeah, I thought it was really well done.
We're feeling good about this one. From an audiolytics standpoint, it got an 82%. And our target for all in-market audio at Oxford Road with Audiolytics is a 90%, achieving 100%. While theoretically as possible, it's kind of like traveling at the speed of light. So there's 71 subcomponents and 9 key components that are all either present or not present and are individually weighted based on performance. And so coming in at 82 is really, really good. Most ads out there in the world are, I think of it as like school. They're C students or even D students. It's like 75%. There's just a few things that you can do to make it better. In this case, our audiolytics analysis brought up the same stuff that we're all talking about, which is enhanced demonstration. Especially if we're going to go long, earn it. Like, earn the 60. So, like, let's put some demonstration of this in there. And then even, you know, I suppose you would go, well, but they're obviously not listening on their Sonos because they don't have one. It's like, yeah, but you could still, that wouldn't stop me from being like...
trying something.
Right. You can make it more audio rich. It doesn't have to be
totally
panning or something 3D, but
yeah,
you can do more.
Yeah, and you could even say, like, and if you were listening to this on your Sonos, you would hear all of the detail of it moving around you and all that. And this show is cool. I mean, they do the spatial stuff. Another call out would be perhaps clarity on the path. You know, at the very end, they throw on there, they do say Sonos a lot, but it's just like learn more at sonos.com. You could potentially reiterate that or make that more clear about where to go. And you can even kind of hear the hesitation in my voice. It's always kind of a funny one, but, you know, we also will grade all of the ads in the Super Bowl. And it's just amazing to me that sometimes with advertisers, we don't just come out and make it like incredibly clear and reiterate exactly what I need you to do and exactly where I need you to go. So technically they did that. They did it with one statement at the end of 60 seconds. You know, we're kind of all flagging somebody might not even get to the end of that 60 seconds. So there could be an opportunity for improvement there. But all things being equal, we're starting out strong. So let's see how Twizzlers did.
I can tell you.
Do you want to predict that? Do you want to give me the Twizzler spot before we listen to the Twizzler spot?
I hate Twizzlers. No questions asked.
Wait, hang on. As an advertiser or the candy?
Are you Red Vine?
I am absolutely team Red Vine.
Okay, all right.
I am team
Yes.
Twizzler, so I'm predisposed to
Are
like
you
that.
from the East Coast originally?
No, I'm from LA.
Jesus, what's wrong with you?
Did I get everything wrong?
You did get everything wrong. Twizzlers is an inferior product to Red Vine. So I'm looking forward to seeing them try to convince me to look at that wretched candy.
Well, as Stu red wine, I, too, like red vines.
Okay.
All right, here we go, Twizzlers.
This episode is brought to you by Twizzlers. Long day, late night, feeling a little bored? Twizzlers is the ultimate sidekick for any moment of the day, no matter what kind of day you're having. The perfect level of sweet and a fun excuse to sit back and relax. Unwind with Twizzlers. To buy now, visit Hersheyland.com/Twizzlers.
All right, Ray, as an admitted critic of Twizzlers, what do you think of that ad?
For one, it's funny because to be abundantly clear, I did not listen to the actual podcast.
That is A-okay, because part of the beauty of what I like about Ad Infinitum is like just listening to the ads in the wild. We do all this audience targeting stuff, right? Finding the perfect person, the perfect moment. Well, there's also the kid that gets in the car as the dad's listening to Ad Lucem, picking her up from high school, and she catches just the Twizzlers ad.
Right.
We hear ads, and it's not always that it's this perfectly contained thing. They are heard in the wild, and we can't control every element. So I actually like that. It's like, great, perfect, because that type of listener exists.
Devoid of context.
Devoid of context. So with that said,
the fact that I was given just a snippet of context, it's hilarious that they're talking about like the perfect companion. I was just like, oh my gosh, that's funny. Because if you think about it, well, this show is talking about a very dark companion. So, I mean, obviously, since I hate them already, they're a dark passenger for me. But I mean, I think it's difficult for a company like that to be able to spell out the proposition of why you should be hanging out with Twizzlers. That's hard to do. I think they were effective in regards to like the voice of it. It's casual. It's like, yeah, we're just trying to hang out with Twizzlers, man. Like, that's all we're doing here, right? I mean, the call to action is clear, but like also who's going to buy Twizzlers on the internet? I guess you can. I mean, if I were to do that, you would obviously be a monster like you, and that's fine. But anyways,
I'm going to order Twizzlers on the internet.
You're going to go to her. See, I remember the website, Hersheyland.com/Twizzlers, because that was unexpected. I was like, oh, I thought you might have been, go to Twizzlers.com / the name of the show or whatever if you wanted to get some nerdy tracking stuff going on, which of course I love. But yeah, I did not care for it. But I understand the difficult task that this brand has to be able to like create a compelling piece of audio to get you to buy Twizzlers.
What about you, Natalie?
Well, it's interesting that you think that it was leaning into the premise of the show, that it was going for like the companion angle. Because when I was listening to it, I was like, what it's saying about Twizzlers could be said about any product in the world. You want to unwind with something. That could be wine. That could be gummy bears. That could be red vines. There's nothing specific about Twizzlers that makes it like a better candidate than any other product for hanging out on the couch.
I would never think of like unwinding with candy.
Yeah. Unless it's like a spool of candy or like, those bubble tapes. Do you remember those?
Of course.
Yeah. If it had some shape that like you were stretching it out, you were unwinding, like maybe that connection.
Oh,
would
sure. Like
land.
the actual physical unwinding.
Yeah, but it needed something that actually connected to the candy. I wasn't getting any sense of how distinct and awesome Twizzlers are.
Well, it's like if they had a new version of Twizzlers that you unwind to eat them, or I was thinking it's like Twizzlers is all wound up, so you don't have to be, right? Because it's twisted. But still, to your point, it seemed like somewhat of a forced proposition that maybe there is a customer behavior, a human behavior that people want to unwind. Maybe they had a piece of research that people passively chew on Twizzlers like a horse chewing on cud. How would you guys rate it against Sonos? So Natalie, 1 out of 10 for Sonos.
I would say I'd give Sonos like an 8.
Okay.
And I would give Twizzlers a 3 or 4.
Sonos, we'll call it 8 as well. I'll agree with you. And then Twizzlers, I would say probably 4. I really have enjoyed both the background music. Normally, I cannot stand background music in advertisements, like full stop. Both the Sonos and the Twizzlers were appropriate. It just felt okay, as opposed to like it was distracting.
Neither were annoying. And actually, like, that's an accomplishment.
Okay, 4 on Twizzlers. Audiolytics gave that one a 65%. There's some more work that could be done there, but I don't want to park on these right now. Let's keep moving forward with the Dave app.
Hey, Ad Lucem listeners. I can bet that we've all probably needed a little financial help at one point in our lives. I know that when I was working my first job out of college, I definitely could have used some extra cash for gas money, groceries, or just to pay the bills on time. If you're in a pinch right now, you should try Dave. Dave is the banking app that's leveling the financial playing field. When you download Dave, you can get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less, no credit check, and no late fees. It's part of Dave's extra cash account, and you can advance the money you need with no interest and then settle up later. That means you have more money for groceries, car repairs, whatever you need, without having to wait for your next paycheck. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to make their finances easier, and now you can too. Download Dave today at dave.com/adlucem. That's dave.com/adlucem. You can get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check, no late fees. Download the Dave app now or go to dave.com/adlucem. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Eligibility criteria and instant transfer fees apply. Banking services provided by Evolve, member FDIC.
Okay, it's starting to make me wonder, did they have a requirement that you had to have easy listening music?
For me, that reads as a Q code mandate. That's part of the production house. And honestly, I noticed the same thing with most Vox Media podcasts. They also always include music. It's just there's certain production houses that always do that.
Okay, so it had the easy going music. What'd you think of the ad?
One, I didn't care for the music. Obviously, no shots against Kenny G, because Kenny G's great. If you did not watch the documentary on HBO, you should definitely watch that. And maybe it's just because I didn't care for the service. I obviously have a problem with Twizzlers, but I don't have a hard opinion of Dave or payday advance loans. I thought the ad was effective. They hit the call to action more than once. I'm familiar with this client. They are definitely big in the performance advertiser space. It seems like they use their learnings of making sure that the mission statement is clear of what it is the product is, because trying to explain something like this is difficult to do in a short period of time. And so using the full 60, I think, was appropriate because there's so many things. You can use it for all this stuff. So I liked it better than Twizzlers, but it didn't resonate in the same way as the Sonos did.
Natalie, what about you?
What I liked about it was that it felt like they cast it correctly. The show that it's on, Troyan Belsario, she plays somebody who has some young, desperate energy. She's somebody who's scrappy and she's trying to make money on the side. And that's one of the things that gets her into hot water and propels the story into darker places. So it felt like it was talking to a world that character would live in. The voice actor also sounded like she was probably about Troyan's age, or probably in her 30s or 40s. But yeah, I thought it was well done. There was some overlap there that I think that they were probably doing on purpose.
You thought it matched the tone well.
Yeah.
What would you guys rate these? We've got an 8 for Sonos. Sonos is the champ. Twizzlers down at the bottom, 3, 4. What do you guys give Dave?
I give it a 6. I'm going to go right in the middle there.
It's a 5 for me. It feels adequate, but doesn't blow my hair back.
Yeah, I think that's right. So it came in at a 77% in Audiolytics, and it's you could boost up the substantiation with some data, give some specific facts and figures. That doesn't hurt. They're leaning really hard on the 500 thing, but what are some outcomes or maybe some customer testimonials that you could include as well? It started out a little bit light with, I can bet that we've all probably needed a little financial help at one point in our lives. It's kind of soft. What's a way that we can hit harder with pain or gain and immediately tie into it? But I struggle with that because, to your point, Natalie, matching the tone of the show and all of that. But I think across the board, it could just be tightened from an execution standpoint to make every word work harder. And I'm seeing a trend here too. This is now 2 60-second fiction podcast ads. And I feel like this group in this moment today, right now, is going it's feeling like 30s are the way to go, unless you're going to earn it. And so I guess I would ask you guys, same kind of observation from Sonos. Do you feel like the Dave ad earned its 60 seconds?
Absolutely not. I was going to say the same thing. I felt like you could easily cut 15 to 30 seconds off of that, and I would have gotten exactly the information that I need.
From a pure advertising perspective, it's always been this real distinct binary of 30s and 60s. And then usually the 60s that are mids, especially from a host read perspective, it can be a minute and a half. That's totally fine. It can be 7 minutes, whatever. It was obviously very loosey-goosey. Now it's tightened up a little bit more, but I think there is that sweet spot, especially when you're talking about if a host isn't including the personal experience aspect, you can cut some of that time off. Did the person need to identify, especially because she was not being I am the producer of the show. It was basically just, we've all been there. We all need money. It's wow, you speak to me, the core of it. We don't need that. So the 45's good.
Yeah. So if we're going to go longer, earn it. And otherwise, let's go shorter. So this next one on our final ad is from BetterHelp, and it's also a 60. So let's see how they worked with the time.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp.
Hey, Cara. Thanks for helping me organize my calendar for this week. I really have had so much trouble doing it on my own.
Of course. That's what I'm here for. Life can be hard to manage sometimes between your career, relationships, and really anything else. It's important to stay connected to what you really want to prioritize.
So true, Cara. On that note, could you set up a therapy appointment for me?
Happy to. Okay, it looks like the earliest available appointment is in a few weeks. Is that okay?
I was really hoping to get in as soon as possible. There's a lot on my plate right now, and I could use some help in navigating my stress.
We could also schedule you with BetterHelp. It's very easy to get set up with a licensed therapist. All you have to do is fill out this brief questionnaire and you'll be matched right away. You can even switch therapists at any time for no additional cost if you want to.
That sounds great. Where will I have to go to meet them?
That's the great thing. Anywhere. BetterHelp is completely online and specifically designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule, which, by the looks of it, is pretty packed at the moment.
If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Let therapy be your map. Visit betterhelp.com/adlucem today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/adlucem.
So these guys have done their homework, is my point of view. What do you guys think?
That one's a winner. And it's interesting because you don't need a host read in a fiction show. With these fiction shows, you often have people like Chris Pine or Olivia Wilde that you probably aren't going to get to do an ad for you, but you can get a character or a device from the story to be part of the ad world. And so you can tie it in that way and get some of that similar value. I liked how they were thinking. I didn't love the casting of the human who sounded a little more robotic than the robot. But putting that aside, I thought this was a really clever way to advertise in a fiction space.
And I think that was Traian Belisario because she voices Kara.
I wasn't sure. I couldn't tell if it was her or if it was, maybe there's different models of Karas.
Oh, interesting.
There are different generations like in the show.
Ray, how about you?
I really enjoyed it as well, especially because the pervasive nature of BetterHelp. I mean, they advertise on literally every podcast to ever exist. I do host reads on my podcast for them, but it's one of those things where it's like when you hear something so much, you obviously just block it out. You're like, I know what BetterHelp is. And so this one, I felt captivated because I was like, how are they going to back into what I know BetterHelp to already be? And so creative execution was top shelf. Obviously the music was cool, easy jazz or anything like that. I think that the conceit of including the characters in the show, that's super fun. Each one of these ads was tailor-made for the show. And I think that that is what should be done in regards to fiction podcasts. I mean, you don't have to, but it's like when you have the ability to sell into something like this and be specific, that's only going to make the ads more compelling overall. I think this one was as good as the Sonos one.
So you gave the Sonos an 8.
I'm going to give this a 9. I actually used those 60 seconds and I wasn't bored.
Yeah, I agree. This is for sure a 9.
All right. And from an audiolytics standpoint, as far as transfer of information for persuasiveness, this one came out at an 83%, squeezing just over Sonos as well, which is often the case on the show, is that the professionals' opinions line up with the model, which is a good thing to see that consistency. I think what's funny about it is that we can all work on certain campaigns and make concessions and put something out that maybe isn't up to that level. But when we're objectively grading something else, we're able to rank it all. But it's like, it's hard in the day in, day out of it. So a couple things I noticed about it where I said they've done their homework is they had 2 characters talking, and consistently that shows improvement in engagements when you have 2 people talking. They have the 2 characters talking. They also brought in a different voice at the end to do the announcer, and there's a different gender at the end as well. They hit both genders that way, right? So there's a lot about this, like you're saying, Ray, it's BetterHelp. So I sort of like watching them in this space. Obviously, we're dealing with professionals. They know what they're doing. And I thought that they matched it to the show without it feeling like pandering, right? Would you guys agree?
Yeah, totally.
100%. Not only does it feel authentic to the characters, it feels authentic to most likely the copy/talking points that were presented. Like it felt hand in hand as opposed to like ham-fisted, where it was like, all right, we got to figure back into this whole online therapy thing. How are we going to do this? It felt easy, but there was effort that was put into it, because sometimes it feels easy where it's like the lowest hanging fruit. I remember when HelloFresh started to first enter the podcast space. And to be clear, I'm not saying I reinvented their marketing strategy, but they knocked on the door of the company I worked for and was like, we would love to run on food podcasts. That just makes so much sense. Like HelloFresh, food podcasts. And I was like, people that like food don't necessarily want to cook food out of a box. It's not saying that your product is inferior, but it's like you want to hit dumb guys that don't know how to cook at all, that walk them through the experience. And so it's like, yeah, you should target this. And why I'm tying it back to this BetterHelp ad is the fact that it's like they are tailor making this to this audience in this specific show, because they know that we're everywhere. So we need to be specific about when we are everywhere, how this is addressed appropriately.
Yeah, like contextualize it when you can, if you can.
Totally.
When I think about, our audience for this show is the chief audio officer, which is any individual at a company or a brand who is responsible for deploying dollars in audio and being held accountable for that. And so it's like we try to leave them with practical advice when it comes to each episode. And I think with this one, with Fiction Podcast, like the things that I'm taking away would be probably 5 different things. So 1, tone. Like if nothing else, if you know you're going to be in storytelling audio, do what you can to match the tone or find out from them. Like maybe the network can help you in a way. Like a lot of times it can still be collaborative, but go, can I match the tone of the show? I think we're all in agreement that it's like, if you're going to go 60, particularly like we're feeling this in fiction, earn the 60. Otherwise, might as well go with the shorter length. And maybe there's a great A/B test that you could do there as well. Something that I thought that they did well in this last one too, from BetterHelp, was they had the melody from the show, which is a big part of the show, the bum, 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 bum. And it was like a palate cleanser for me into the break, even if they wouldn't have like stuck with the Kara thing. And so I just wrote that down as well. Look at using music for the show. Like that's something I want to explore too, just coming out of this conversation, is like, because that's a way the network and the brand or agency could partner together. Like that doesn't seem like that big of a lift, but you could transition into your ad, and your ad could kind of go anywhere. And then consider using a producer. I thought that was nice with Sonos that they were using the producer to voice the ad. So it is kind of like a host read. So match the tone, earn the time, consider using music from the show as a palate cleanser to get you into the ad, and also look at working with the producers of the show to voice the ad. Is there anything I left out, guys? Any other advice you would give chief audio officers wanting to advertise in fiction podcasts?
The only other thing that I would add to that would be the idea of making sure that your product or service actually fits. Because there's a lot of people that are especially when you are working at a company and the brand is obviously, that's the only thing you pay attention to. Sometimes you lose the concept and context of what it is. Be like, maybe this isn't the best place for us. Like maybe fiction isn't where we need to be. You really need to make sure that you are understanding how that message is delivered in different contexts. And even also looking at where you are not. Say, whatever, you're a client, we'll use BetterHelp as an example. Maybe there's some third rail that you've never touched in regards to content. Or you see all your competitors, that are doing all this stuff and everybody's doing the same thing. Pay attention to stuff that's outside of what it is that you're doing, because you get so locked into what it is that you're working on. It's sometimes really difficult. So those are the only 2 pieces of advice I would say. Make sure that this is the right fit for you from a fiction podcast perspective. And then 2, look at what your competitors are doing to be able to see like, oh, where are the soft spots? Maybe we haven't, if we're a fantasy sports app and like, oh my gosh, we don't care about the female audience. It's just like, well, females don't like sports or gamble. That's not true. Just figure out how to approach that audience in an authentic way as opposed to just completely ignoring it.
I do context that first ad for Juvederm that we assume was in Clean Beauty. It does make the company look a little clueless. And I don't know when the ad for Better Health appeared in the series, if it was only in like the first half or was also in the second half, but I think it's worth thinking about whether your ad might come across as unintentionally ironic or flat-footed. As that show progresses, the darker implications of that technology start coming out. And so I feel like that ad would be so much more successful in the first half of the series than in the second. And so paying attention to context, actually like listening to the story and seeing how your product fits in, and if it fits in a way that helps the product or hurts the product.
I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking the same thing, is that like, especially at the end, it's like, how would that feel later in the series where you're kind of like, I don't know if I want Kara telling, and who's on the other end of this Kara, right? That's because
there's a massive data breach and records of people's intimate conversations are released, which is the last thing you want associated with a company like Better Health. So you probably wouldn't want to advertise in that episode.
So these are treacherous waters navigating how to advertise in fiction audio. But if we can do it well and really craft it well, we all agree there's a ton of power that can be unlocked there. I want to end with you, Nathalie. It's so cool what you get to do for a living. For anybody that's listening, how do you even begin to get into telling stories in audio?
Just tell stories. I think most of the people I work with don't come from audio. They come from journalism. They come from fiction. They come from documentaries. So once you learn how to tell a story, that skill is applicable. Every medium is different, but it's still applicable across mediums. And audio is really easy to start with. Buy a mic, tape yourself going through a day, do a follow doc on yourself on something you're living through. I would say that there's a few programs that really do give people a leg up, like Transom and Salt, that help you professionalize pretty quickly and learn the lingo and start thinking about audio storytelling. And then, like everything, it's just networking, putting yourself out there. Yeah, I don't think there's like one secret to getting into making audio, except that you really have to love story.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Just do it.
And know you'll suck for a long time. When I say a long time, that can be different things to different people, but like there's always that fear of doing something because like, oh, I'm going to fail at it. I'm going to be terrible at it or whatever. Yes, of course you will.
Yeah.
You'll be terrible at it until you're not, because you've done it enough and you've learned enough to where it's like, oh yeah, I feel somewhat okay about this now. Once you've arrived there, then you're like, okay, you're much farther along than when you first started. And that's all that anybody can hope for.
Yeah, no, there's an incredible learning process to making audio fiction in particular. Like you think that if you're a short story writer or a novelist or you have a background in long form fiction, that you can transfer that same skill set. But audio requires so much more clarity and so much more momentum to keep people interested. You can't do the same kind of tangents or asides that you can get away with in printed work. It is a different mode. It does require learning it. Not even the best writer is going to come to audio and nail audio on the first try. There's a learning curve, but it's a fun learning curve.
That's right. We got to have fun doing it. Otherwise, what's the point? And you've done very well. So congrats again on the award from last year. And it is a fantastic show. So I suggest everybody listen to I Hear Fear. And thank you, Nathalie and Ray, for joining Ad Infinitum. This was an awesome conversation. Thanks to you guys so much for joining.
It was so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you for caring about advertising, Stu.
You're welcome. Even when the ads are scary, we just want the ads to work. And I also want to say a special thank you to Benstown, where we were recording live all together today, which was very cool. And to Darren, our engineer. Give it up for Darren. Finally, if you like what you were hearing today, show us some love with an honest 5-star review. And if there's an ad that you can't get out of your head and want us to break down or have some other aspect of how to make the ads work better in audio, let me know at stew@oxfordroad.com. That's STEW@oxfordroad.com. And until our next show, remember to have fun making the ads work.